So Kimberly had a question about going from having a demand and supply equation, plugging in a couple numbers, and how to solve for the equilibrium of that. And it sounded like she was asking about question 3b, but of course I know she wouldn't have asked about that directly because she wouldn't have wanted everyone else in the chat room to get the answer to the assignment. So she asked in a very general way, and I said, well, let's go over to our book here and see how they're doing it. So hopefully everyone can see my screen here. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. And what they've been doing throughout this chapter is having this, well, they actually had bigger supply-demand equations than this. Let me see if I can find it quickly. They had kind of a general demand equation before this, but then they start putting some numbers into it. So we've got this demand equation here where the quantity demanded equals this 3,200 minus 10p. So p is the price of whatever this product is. I don't know if they named it. M is their income level, and PR is the price of a related good. So that's kind of similar to what was in 3b here. From that, they come up here and they say, well, let's assume that income is 60,000, price of a related good is $200, because we want to be able to solve these things for equilibriums. And we need to have two equations with only two variables. Right now, you've got this demand equation that's got a P, an M, and a PR in it. But if we can plug in these values of income and this related good, then we can kind of reduce this equation down from this long thing into just this quantity demanded equals 1,400 minus 10p. So assuming income is 60,000, assuming the price of the related good is 200, then you get this quantity demand equation of 1,400 minus 10p. Then if we go over to the supply part of it, I've got this supply equation that looks really nasty. And I'll come over here and let's see. Okay. We've got quantity supplied equals 100 plus 20 times P minus 10 times P1. PI is probably the price of an input, and this F must be the number of other firms. So they're going to do sort of the same thing they did before on the demand side. They'll plug those numbers in, the $100 for the input price, the 25 firms into here. And come over to the next page. So here they're making the substitutions, and then they get this quantity supplied equation of negative 400 plus 20P. So I've got a demand equation that's somewhat small now. I've got a supply equation that's somewhat small. And as 3b asks, solve algebraically to determine the equilibrium price and quantity. And I'm not going to do that for this question, but we can look over again how they did it in the book here. And
okay,
again,
okay, I'm sorry. I have a question real quick.
Sure.
So for am I supposed to have input information for the quantity supplied equation? Am I supposed to have an input or?
The way that they set it up in this, the way that they're kind of setting up this equation here, you will, because you've got this PI term in your equation, you have this F term in your equation. So let's see, in the question that I gave you, I just told you that the quantity supplied is 30 plus 3P. So you don't have an input price, you don't have an F term in this equation. So you don't really need to worry about those. Because you've already got a supply equation that only has a P in it. Just like when we were able to trim this thing down, I don't know why that lady keeps popping up. When we trim this thing down, I've got a quantity supplied equation with just a P term in it. So minus 400 plus 20.
Okay, I got you.
And that was the same thing on the demand side too.
Okay.
I wanted to get it from something that was big with lots of numbers in it. Okay. So I've got quantity demanded with just a P term in it. And as far as your assignment goes, you've already got quantity supplied with just a P term, but you've got your quantity demand that's got these other terms in it too. So you got to be able to squish this thing down. So it's just quantity demand as a function of just the P variable. So I got both of those. I got my supply demand. Quantity demand is 1,400 minus 10P. So that's sort of the reduced form version of the demand equation. Supply equation was this QS equals negative 400 plus 20P. And algebraic or graphically, which I always tend to think graphically anyway, that's the easiest thing for me to think about. I've got my downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. To me, equilibrium is where they cross. And where they cross means there's a single the quantity at which they cross is associated with just a single price, or the price at which they cross is just associated with a single quantity. So when you're at equilibrium, the quantities have to be the same and the prices have to be the same. So when I come over here to this equilibrium thing, I've got this demand equation, this supply equation, and I know that the value for P, the equilibrium value for P has to be exactly the same. The price has to be exactly the same. I can't have two different prices. And the quantities have to be the same too. So again, it says, since equilibrium requires that quantity demand equals quantity supplied. So since I have this, since I know QD has to equal QS, then I can just say, well, if QD has to equal QS, then 1400 minus 10P has to equal negative 400 plus 20P. So this side is just the quantity demand side, and this side is the quantity supply side. So those two have to be equal to each other. And then, like I said, algebraically, you can just solve these things to figure out that P equals 60. And so once you know that, once you know the price is 60, then you can take that price of 60 and plug it in over here. Or you can take that, and so if you plug it in here, then you get 1400 minus, 600. So it ends up being, a quantity ends up being 800. Or you can take that same $60 price and put it in over here, because you're going to get the same answer no matter what. Minus 400 plus 20 times 60, this ends up being 1200. So minus 400 plus 1200 also gives me 800. So when I'm setting these two equations equal to each other, I'm going to get a single price, and the quantities that I get is going to be exactly the same too. So if they were to, well, they graphed this thing. If you went into Excel and made a table like is in table 2.9, if you made a table like this and you graphed it, then you should get a graph that looks like figure 2.5, and you should see that where they cross is consistent with the algebraic result that you got. So the equilibrium price that I found was $60. The equilibrium quantity that I found was $80. So you can figure it out algebraically the way that they did here on page 62. You can figure it out graphically the way they did on page 63. Or you could figure it out in a table way also, how they did at the top of page 62. Because I can see here, when the price is 60, the quantity supplied is 800 and the quantity demand is 800. So I can see that there is neither excess supply nor excess demand here. So a lot of different ways you can kind of solve these questions. Again, in the assignment that you have, it's going to be easiest to do it the algebra way because I've given you the algebra equations. You could go ahead and make a table out of these equations that you have, and you could make a graph too. In fact, I probably asked you to make a graph. Yeah, there we go. In part C, I asked you to make a graph just to verify your answers.